Our story begins in late 1969 when Donald Cameron, owner of Cameron's Drugstore, had a dream of upgrading Pawtuxet. He put together a proposal for financing his proposition and had this architectural drawing made to submit his plan to the city of Cranston. Pawtuxet was a low-income census tract at that time and therefore eligible for housing and urban development funds. These were federal monies that Cameron proposed to use for demolition of existing structures and building high-rise apartments, a percentage of which would be low-income housing. Cameron's Drugstore would be on the first floor, along with other retail space. Note the boat slips, the bridge, and the ample parking on Broad Street. Bill Lindsay of Lindsay's Market was absolutely opposed to Cameron's plan. He launched a campaign to defeat the proposal. Many a political discussion went on over Bill Lindsay's meat counter. There was a major public outcry. The village came alive. The Providence Journal covered the story. There were letters to the editor, and the public hearing was packed with village residents speaking out against Cameron's proposal to change the face of Pawtuxet. Thanks to Bill Lindsay and all the residents who spoke out, the plan was defeated. Antoinette Downing of the Rhode Island Historic Preservation and Heritage Commission was approached for help in finding a way to protect Pawtuxet from any future development proposals. The commission initiated an architectural survey to be used as an appeal for the village to be placed on the National Historic Register. Bonnie Warren was the architect who conducted the survey for the commission. Being placed on the register would give protection against any federal money, such as that HUD money, being used to destroy the historic character of the village. The report summarized the architecture of the village, traced its history, marked the boundaries, and outlined a beautification and preservation program for residents to carry out in order to spark private investment and continued efforts toward the restoration and preservation of the community.
In 1973, Pawtuxet Village was added to the National Historic Register, making it the first National Historic District in Rhode Island.
Marlene Weir was a resident of the village, lived on South Atlantic Avenue, and was a professional city planner. She called a meeting of village residents to review the recommendations of the report and launch an organization to carry out the report's suggestions.
Attorney John Murphy, also a village resident, drew up incorporation papers listing Marlene Weir, Janet Hartman, Henry Brown, Bill Lindsay, and Hazel Kennedy as incorporators. The organization would be known as the Pawtuxet Village Association.
PVA got to work on carrying out the recommendations of the survey report. The first item on the agenda marked the entrances to the district on Post Road, Narragansett Parkway, Broad Street, and Narragansett Boulevard. Donald Hardesty, a village resident who worked at the state prison, was instrumental in having blue metal signs made for our main roadways into the village. Cranston Public Works Department made the stanchions and installed them.
To further identify the district, PVA worked with the cities of Warwick and Cranston to have all the street signs within the district changed to blue and white.
Johansson's upholstery shop was at the bottom of Post Road Hill. Madeline Toy bought the building and worked with Antoinette Downing and historic preservation grants to restore the Christopher Rhodes house. There was a dramatic change when the proper windows were reinstalled.
PVA wrote proposals to both Cranston and Warwick for community development funds to install the historic lanterns on both sides of the bridge. PVA convinced the Rhode Island School of Design to have a class conduct a design study of Pawtuxet's business district for one semester. Students presented drawings for changing signage, billboards, awnings, sidewalks, and planting. Their work was presented in Warwick City Hall and to the business owners of the village. PVA went to Warwick and Cranston for additional community development money to install street trees on both sides of the bridge.
This photo was taken after the street trees and historic lanterns were installed. The owner of Deer Huts at that time provided the private investment to complete the new look on that block. As a sidebar, the original commission report also recommended underground wiring down Broad Street. You can imagine what a difference that would make to the streetscape. The Pawtuxet report discussed important vistas, which were defined as a controlled view or interesting scene. It talked about character areas. We had a state traffic island at the junction of Post Road, Fair Street, and Bank Street at the once very popular Bank Cafe restaurant. PVA appealed to the state to release authority over the island to the city of Warwick. The city accepted on condition that PVA maintain the island. We asked the city to remove the macadam and replace it with loam. PVA members rolled up their sleeves, creating the first garden group. Adults and children hauled mulch donated by the city's tree warden and planted donated shrubs and plantings from all the neighbors' gardens. Notice the Captain Remington house overlooking the garden. We'll see that again later.
Husbands were recruited to work in the garden as well. Water hoses were stretched across from the restaurant to battle the hot summer sun in such an exposed location. The garden began taking shape. Notice the bank cafe at this time. The garden developed, and another round of community development funding expanded the historic lanterns up to the garden. Private investment and the Rhode Island Historic Preservation grants significantly changed the look of the bank cafe. Tom DeVona's house overlooked the garden. Tom was responsible for major developments at the garden and a more professional look. He lobbied for the city to install the brick sidewalk as well as a water line within the garden. Rhode Island Historic Preservation grants and DeVona's perseverance showed remarkable results and greatly enhanced the triangle.
Here was the view of the cove from Post Road. The focus was on getting to Cranston and Providence. We were not a destination. Asprey's boatyard had declined, and May Asprey put the property up for sale. Frank Pettis thought of buying it and building a strip of stores. However, a very talented couple living on a boat in the cove envisioned the property as public access to the water. They were Franny and Eugene Lee. Eugene was the designer of Trinity Square Theater, and both were Tony Award winners. Eugene is a noted set designer, and Franny a costume designer.
They brought their vision to Bill Lindsay and PVA, saying, "Buy it. Build a park." Well, why not dream a little? So here goes Marlene Ware, Janet Hartman, and Henry Brown off to Warwick City Hall to see Mayor McCaffrey about buying the land. Under Mayor Joe Walsh, PVA requested more CD money to match the Bureau of Outdoor Recreation funds. Using Warwick Public Works and various in-kind services, we were then able to actually develop the property. By that time, Marlene Ware was the Community Development Director for the City of Warwick, and Janet Hartman was Deputy Director for Parks and Recreation, coordinating the on-site development.
Because we used federal funds, all electrical wires had to be put underground within the park property. A sewer pumping station and underground sewer lines were installed across the park to service all the homes along the cove below Narragansett Parkway. Paths were trenches of pea stone to drain the high water table in the park. Cedar workers built the gazebo, and May Asprey paid for the sign, which officially named the building the Asprey Boathouse in memory of her husband, David Asprey.
The development of the park was done on a shoestring budget of $59,800, $17,500 of which was community development monies, and a major contribution of in-kind services from all of the city workers in planning, parks, and public works departments.
The park was officially opened in May of 1979, even before the grass had a chance to grow. The Pawtuxet Rangers saluted the opening with Mayor Joseph W. Walsh. Concerts were scheduled in the park and were very well received, along with programs in the boathouse. Marlene found another source for funding handicap projects and put together a proposal for a Garden of the Senses in Pawtuxet Park. We got the grant.
Janet was in the Parks Department to oversee the building of the garden and installation of Braille signs for the vision impaired. A variety of plant material was chosen, which would be identified by touch and smell. Marlene and Janet both went to work in the Providence Parks Department before the city received a national award for the Garden of the Senses.
In the next several years, there was a lack of attention in the park. Vandalism increased and went unchecked. The gazebo deteriorated and was razed. The Asprey Boathouse was boarded up and closed. Gaspee Days Committee needed a home and had $20,000 in their savings account. The committee and Councilman Scott Avedisian hammered out a deal with the city to put $20,000 towards improvements to the building, and they would have a home. The building would be shared with the public and remain handicapped accessible as a voting location because of the use of federal funds.
Students from the Vocational Tech High School rebuilt the gazebo. Attention came back to the park, and it is now treasured again, as it should be. Compare these current views to the views at the end of the boatyard's life.
By 1977, PVA had quite a list of accomplishments. They had added entrance signs, blue street signs, transformed a traffic island to a garden in the front of the Bank Cafe, purchased the boatyard for a public park, added colonial street lanterns, had street trees installed, instigated a RISD design study, and secured an additional $39,000 for beautification and improvement projects. The next step, repave the bridge. The plan included a cast iron railing reminiscent of the older bridge design. We launched a Buy a Brick campaign to raise the money needed, but ultimately the State Department of Transportation did the brick pavers with an altered plan and did not replace the railing.
John Murphy was the chairman of PVA in 1978. John is a local attorney and was responsible for getting a 501c3 tax-exempt status for the organization. In 1979, Mayor Walsh approved additional community development block grant money to continue the brick sidewalks up the Post Road Hill.
In 1982, there was a 3-acre parcel of woodland sold to John Thell, who planned to build 34 condominiums with parking along Post Road. Residents and members of the Pawtuxet Village Association were attached to the wooded strip along the banks of the Pawtuxet River. They objected to the plan as submitted, and after a number of meetings, it was scaled down from 3 large buildings of 12 units each to 6 smaller buildings with 4 units each. The design was altered to place parking and garages at the rear of the buildings so they would not be visible from Post Road. Today, you have the Gaspee Park condominiums.
In 1986, Janet Hartman reread the original Rhode Island Preservation Survey report and noted that the PVA needed to be more visible, educate the community about our history and architecture, and keep the public advised about developmental proposals. She took some ideas to Ginny Leslie, who was the chairperson at the time, and without question or discussion, Ginny said, "Run with it." The Bridge Quarterly newspaper was born as a tabloid-sized publication. PVA presented a community development proposal for the city of Cranston to rebuild the playground on Commercial Street. It is abutted by an old jewelry industry building, which is now converted to condominiums. The combination of private and public funds has transformed the entire west side of Commercial Street.
Billboards. Over and over and over, we begged and pleaded for the billboards to be removed. We almost picketed the drugstore and threatened to cut the legs off the sign in the night. There were 2 on top of Little Falls Bakery, 2 on each side of the falls at the bridge, and of course, the huge one on top of Cameron's drugstore. Thankfully, those out-of-scale billboards have been removed, with the exception of the one remaining on top of the drugstore. Here we see 3 good friends of PVA. Marlene Weir, our founder, moved to Massachusetts in the mid-'80s. She was a brilliant planner and a creative thinker. She is sorely missed. Martha Smith eventually moved out of state as well. She was a very high-energy chairperson who fought several major battles for PVA. Merrill Bailey, now deceased, was a Providence Journal editor who secretly helped us as the ghost editor for the bridge. We should remain thankful for all their time and dedication.
Marshlands and woods surrounded the New Farm Supper Club. Just outside the historic district, PVA had no actual clout, but we fought the development of that property and filling of wetlands. We lost the battle. The Village Green condominiums with 150 modular units happened almost overnight, and before the sewer lines were approved and installed.
In 1987, Richard Freiberg of Cranston petitioned the city of Warwick to build an office building at the corner of Post Road and Narragansett Parkway. The building was supposedly designed to fit into the neighborhood. It was to be a colonial-type building on a 50 by 100-foot lot. PVA members were struck with disbelief. Residents were already upset because of the recent development at the site of the New Farm restaurant. Ginny Leslie stepped up to the mark by mortgaging her house, and the Warwick Land Trust was born under the hand of Martha Smith. That corner is now protected from development. In 1987, Douglas Burgess and James and Thomas Parrish planned to build 13 two-bed condos on Emmons Street and Peck Lane. It was zoned for waterfront and general business, so it would need a zoning change to A7 zoning. PVA objected to the designs put forth and ultimately hit the New York Times with only one councilman helping us in our battle. That was Lincoln Chafee, way over in Ward 9. Antoinette Downing from the Preservation Commission appeared at the City Council hearings with us till midnight. Some adjustments were made, and the developers ultimately got their zone change. We lost the battle, but Parrish and Company lost their shirt, and a new developer got to finish the project. PVA paid for the marker at the end of Peck Lane to mark the old street where the Gaspee prisoners were brought ashore.
You'll remember that the PVA wanted to raise awareness of the historic aspects of the village. Through beautification projects, you can encourage private investment. The Driftwood restaurant was in decline in the 80s. Significant private investment and renovations transformed it to the present Basta restaurant.
Pawtuxet Cemetery, historic cemetery number 3, where the Rhodes family and other early families are buried, had an old wire fence across the front. It was falling apart, and the entire entrance had been neglected. Chris Zarkadoulis wrote a proposal for a community development grant. The proposal called for a new wrought iron fence and gate. She and Madeline Toy represented PVA and were successful in securing the funding. It was Madeline's persistence that kept us all focused on the care of the cemetery.
Roads on the Pawtuxet had fallen into decline and was threatened with demolition. PVA put out a call to Ted Sanderson and the Rhode Island Historic Preservation Commission to prevail upon the Shriners to restore the building, and it survived.
Back to important vistas again. The intersection of Broad Street, Post Road, and Narragansett Parkway show us how a combination of private and public investments can significantly change an entryway into a city. Brick sidewalks, colonial lighting fixtures, and street trees combine with private restoration to change the face of this vista. Eventually, we hope to see the planned beautification and traffic calming project making a difference to the flagpole island at this intersection.
Holidays in Pawtuxet include wreaths on the historic lanterns and holiday events. Ed Greer, a member of the PVA board, has championed these projects and kept us going in years when the organization lost its momentum. Now, some before and after photos to demonstrate how a heightened awareness and some new ownership have impacted our village. We've become charming, where in past years we were thought of as an eligible census tract of low-income homeowners.
This house is on Ford Avenue on Pawtuxet Neck. Covered with asbestos shingle many years ago, it was purchased by a developer who stripped it, restored it, and created 2 wonderful condominium units overlooking the Upper Cove. Here is another house that was covered with dark brown shingle on Bayside Avenue on the Warwick side of the village. The cyclone fence, shingles, and screen panels in the porch were removed. A 5-color paint job with some added fish scale shingles completed the restoration project. White shingle was chosen to cover up this 1700s house on Post Road Hill. The owner unveiled the house, replaced the windows with 12/12 sash, replaced the front door, and uncovered the original transom above the door. Today, the house looks as if it belongs behind the brick sidewalks and historic lantern.
This old house on Fair Street dates to 1770. However, the chimney and front porch were altered over the years. Windows had been changed and the condition looked worn. Today the house has a reconstructed chimney, front porch, and 12/12 window sash, along with other updates.
This house on Bridge Street was a bit tired until someone came along who recognized how beautiful it could be with the proper alterations and paint job. Bank Street has had its share of neglected properties, but some recent residents of the village undertook the project of uncovering an old gem that dates back to the 1700s. Clapboard was underneath asbestos shingle, and other modifications brought the house a great distance back to the original intention of the builder. This little house on Remington Street has a very long history of being a school before it became a home. An investor actually put this house back into a condition that surprised the entire neighborhood. Rail fence was replaced by a white picket fence. Brown shingles were removed and clapboard painted. The aluminum overhang above the door and aluminum storm door were removed. Today it is revered as one of the most charming of all the little houses in Pawtuxet.
PVA cannot take credit for the Pawtuxet Armory's transformation, but we salute the Pawtuxet Rangers for the changes here. Mrs. Franson called this building home for many years as part of the Swedish settlement in the village. Eventually, when she was gone, the Rangers purchased the property, renovated it, and placed it on the National Historic Register. Recent grants from the Rhode Island Historical Preservation Commission will ensure that the building stands for many years to come, providing a meeting place and museum for the Pawtuxet Artillery and Fife and Drum Corps.
Lindsay's Market was owned by the Lindsay brothers for many years. They used Antoinette Downing's advice when they made improvements to their building. It is one of the last small mom-and-pop markets in existence today. The current owner has chosen to add vinyl siding to the building, replacing windows as he proceeded to modernize. Without local historic district zoning, there is nothing that can be done about those property owners who invest their own money in this way. The Pawtuxet Baptist Church was having difficulty keeping up with the cost of repainting their church, and PVA gave a generous donation to help stave off the inevitable. However, when the need for repainting rolled around once more, the church elders chose to apply vinyl siding to the old church. Now we will look at the evolution of a block of stores over the years. This is the Ralph block in the 1920s. Rice's restaurant was in the middle with Cameron's drugstore to the south of it. An old house stood at the corner of Aborn Street. Today, the old house is a parking lot with strip stores to the rear. Cameron's pharmacy looked like this in the 1940s, and Rice's restaurant had become the 7 C's. The block was known as the Watson Block, named for the original owner of the drugstore. Don Cameron added the billboard on the roof in the 1960s. Eventually, that owner bulldozed the small stores and expanded the drugstore to encompass the entire block as it stands today.
After years of PVA requesting local historic district zoning, the city of Warwick finally passed the ordinance in the 80s. This gave a second layer of protection to the historic district. First, the National Historic District says that no federal money can be used to destroy the character of the historic district. Second, the local zoning protection monitors how private money is used within the district. This applies to only the exterior of the building. It also offers a 20% tax credit to the property owner, which helps to offset the cost of restoration.
The Gaspee Lounge was in decline on the Warwick side of the district. It was a heartache for the village, frequently closed for building violations and suspected for drug traffic. The condition worsened as the years passed. Under the direction of the Warwick Historic District Commission, the property has been restored and is expected to reopen as an Irish pub soon.
We've mentioned important vistas and the gateway into the city. Narragansett Parkway and the Gaspee Lounge was our gateway. The vista has been transformed after several versions were reviewed by the Warwick Historic District Commission. There are now 4 condominiums where the gas station once stood.
Sometimes we disagree. Some people wanted a small museum and art gallery in this small house at the corner of Pawtuxet Park. Others wanted more open space. The house was raised, and the community continues to look at other alternatives for a combination museum, gallery, and welcoming center.
PVA still has an active garden group led by Carol Panos of the PVA board. Pictured here with part of her dedicated crew, including Ed Greer, Henry Brown, Ginny Leslie, and others, they do a great job with flowers in the Pawtuxet Park, as well as tending to the flower boxes on the bridge.
There is more to be done. Markers and signage need to be reviewed and additional signage considered. We have the brown marker on Post Road Hill, the marker for the old fort on Fort Avenue, and the children temporarily mark important sites when conducting the historic house tour each spring. Philadelphia can give us good examples of signage to consider for our future planning.
There are still buildings to be saved and restored. There are brick sidewalks to be continued and historic lanterns to be expanded. This house could look like the house on Bridge Street. The story of PVA doesn't end here. The protection of this wonderful historic village is a continuous process of education, revival, and celebration of our success.